When I say run, I don't mean panic. I mean don't argue. Don't explain. Don't stay long enough to need closure. People misunderstand the word run. They imagine panic, drama, fear. That's not what this is. When I say run, I mean something quieter. I mean leave before you have to explain. Before you get entangled. Before your nervous system starts carrying weight that isn't yours. Because the most dangerous personality types don't look dangerous. They look familiar, comfortable, reasonable. They don't attack your life. They slowly rearrange it until your energy, your time, and your self-trust no longer feel like they belong to you. And the unsettling part is this. Most people don't realize what's happening until they're already depleted. They don't notice a single red flag. They just notice that they're tired around certain people. Quieter, smaller, less clear. Dark psychology doesn't focus on villains. It focuses on patterns. Patterns that repeat because they work. Patterns that persist because most people stay too long trying to be fair, patient, or understanding. This video isn't about fear. It's about recognition. Because once you can see these patterns clearly, you don't need confrontation. You don't need closure. You don't need to prove anything. You simply don't stay. Before we begin, a quiet request. If this kind of psychological clarity matters to you, clarity without noise, without motivation, without pretending, stay with the channel. Not because you need more information, but because awareness deepens when it's revisited slowly. Now let's talk about the 3 personality types that quiet power never argues with and never waits around to outgrow. The first personality type quiet power learns to recognize early is not aggressive, not cruel, and not obviously manipulative. In fact, this person often appears gentle, wounded, even admirable. They are the ones people describe as just having a hard time or needing a little extra support. At first, they feel safe, familiar, human. You don't run from them because nothing about them feels threatening. And that is precisely why they are dangerous to your inner balance. This personality operates as an emotional vacuum, not intentionally, not consciously, but consistently. They absorb energy, reassurance, attention, and emotional labor without ever fully replenishing themselves or you. Around them, conversations slowly orbit their struggles. Their moods quietly dictate the emotional temperature of the room. Their needs subtly become priorities, while yours are postponed, minimized, or forgotten without argument. Dark psychology doesn't label this person a villain. It labels them a pattern formed through dependence, unresolved insecurity, and an unconscious expectation that others will stabilize what they cannot regulate alone. These individuals often learned early that closeness equals survival. They didn't develop internal containment, so they borrow it from whoever is nearby. Over time, proximity becomes extraction. The reason this type is so difficult to detect is because they rarely ask outright. They don't demand. They don't impose. Instead, they signal. Sighs, long pauses. Stories that trail off just long enough for you to step in. Emotional cues that invite reassurance. And because you are perceptive, empathetic, or simply present, you respond. Once, then again, then automatically. Quiet power understands something crucial here. People repeat what works. If someone consistently feels calmer, clearer, or steadier after interacting with you, while you feel slightly diminished, a silent exchange has already been established. You become a regulator, a container, a stabilizing presence. And once that role forms, it becomes expected. This is where many people get confused. They think kindness is being exploited because someone else is selfish. But exploitation here is not driven by intent. It's driven by adaptation. The emotional vacuum doesn't think, I will take from you. Their nervous system simply learns, I feel better when you are here, and systems protect what regulates them. You'll notice the signs slowly. You feel responsible for their mood. You hesitate to bring up your own struggles because they already have enough on their plate. You start editing yourself to avoid destabilizing them. And most subtly, you feel guilty for wanting space, even when nothing obvious has gone wrong. Quiet power doesn't argue with this type. It doesn't explain. Explanation only deepens the bond. When you explain, you reassure. When you reassure, you regulate. And when you regulate, the pattern tightens. The emotional vacuum interprets explanation as closeness, not distance. This is why confrontation fails. If you say, "I feel drained," they hear, "I need you to reassure me differently." If you say, "I need space," they feel abandoned and unconsciously pull closer. Not to hurt you, but to stabilize themselves. The dynamic becomes a loop. The real cost shows up internally. You lose spontaneity. You lose lightness. You become measured, careful, and slightly heavy around them. You stop bringing your full self because there is no room. Their emotional gravity bends the space. Quiet power runs here, not with speed, but with silence. It begins by removing availability, not dramatically, not coldly, just gradually. Shorter conversations, fewer explanations, less emotional labor offered freely. No rescuing, no fixing, no absorbing. And something revealing happens when you do this. The emotional vacuum either recalibrates or detaches. If they recalibrate, they begin learning self-regulation. If they detach, it confirms the pattern was never mutual. In either case, you regain equilibrium without conflict. Running in this context does not mean rejection. It means refusing to become a resource that replaces someone else's inner structure. Quiet power knows compassion does not require self-erasure. Support does not require sacrifice. Presence does not require depletion. The reason this personality type ruins lives quietly is because it rarely looks like harm. It looks like loyalty, patience, being the strong one. And by the time you notice the cost, you've already normalized the imbalance. Quiet power notices earlier. It pays attention to how interactions feel afterward, not how they look during. It tracks energy, not intentions. And when it senses a pattern forming, where one side stabilizes and the other consumes, it doesn't negotiate. It leaves the room before the vacuum forms. That is not cruelty. That is containment. The second personality type quiet power avoids is far more subtle, because it often hides behind competence, charm, and apparent strength. This person does not drain you emotionally the way the vacuum does. Instead, they quietly position themselves above you. They observe. They measure. They mirror just enough to build trust, then slowly begin shaping the environment in their favor. You don't feel exhausted around them. You feel slightly smaller. This type thrives on unspoken hierarchy. They rarely declare dominance. They establish it through tone, timing, and implication. Compliments arrive with edges. Advice arrives unrequested. Their presence subtly reframes your choices, making you question decisions you were once confident about. Over time, you begin adjusting yourself without realizing it, aligning with their preferences to avoid friction that never fully surfaces. Dark psychology recognizes this as the silent calibrator, a personality that organizes relationships through control of perception rather than force. They don't need obedience. They need influence. And influence works best when it feels voluntary, when you believe you chose it. These individuals are often intelligent, articulate, and socially skilled. They understand power not as domination, but as positioning. They know when to speak, when to withhold, and when to appear supportive. Their greatest strength is plausibility. If confronted, they seem reasonable, calm, even concerned, which makes your discomfort feel unjustified. Quiet power pays attention to one key signal here: internal hesitation. Around this type, you pause before speaking. You second-guess your instincts. You rehearse conversations in advance. None of this is accidental. The silent calibrator creates an atmosphere where your certainty erodes, not through attack, but through comparison. Their achievements, their insights, their experience, always just slightly ahead of yours. The danger is not that they control you overtly. It's that they slowly become the reference point you measure yourself against. Your standards shift. Your confidence becomes conditional. You begin seeking their approval without ever consciously deciding to do so. This personality often frames their behavior as mentorship, leadership, or guidance. And sometimes they truly believe that is what they are offering. Intent is not the issue. Effect is. The effect is asymmetry. One person defines the frame, the other adapts within it. Quiet power understands that power imbalance does not require malice. It requires access. Once someone has consistent access to your decision-making process, influence becomes inevitable. The silent calibrator listens closely, not to support you, but to map you. Strengths, doubts, triggers, all information. You'll notice their presence lingers even when they are not around. You hear their voice in your head. Their perspective overrides your own. This is the point of quiet danger. Not because they are evil, but because your inner authority has been outsourced. Confrontation again fails here. If you challenge them, they reframe. If you express discomfort, they intellectualize. They remain composed while you appear reactive. The dynamic flips, making you feel irrational for sensing imbalance. This is how subtle dominance maintains itself. Quiet power does not attempt to win clarity inside a distorted frame. It exits the frame entirely. It stops explaining, stops seeking validation, stops offering information that can be used to recalibrate influence. Silence here is not withdrawal. It is protection. Distance disrupts this personality's leverage. Without access, they lose context. Without context, their influence weakens. And something telling occurs when quiet power steps back. The calibrator either escalates control attempts or loses interest. Both outcomes confirm the pattern. Running from this type means refusing to be positioned. It means trusting your internal signals over external polish. It means recognizing that respect never requires you to feel diminished to be earned. Quiet power doesn't compete. It doesn't submit. It disengages. It understands that true authority feels stabilizing, not constricting. And when a relationship consistently makes you doubt yourself, no amount of admiration compensates for that cost. This personality ruins lives quietly by reshaping identity over time. You don't notice a single moment of harm. You notice that you are no longer standing where you began. Your voice softer, your certainty thinner, your direction slightly altered. Quiet power notices earlier. It feels the shrinkage before it becomes permanent. And it leaves before influence becomes identity. That is not fear. That is sovereignty. There is an important distinction quiet power makes here that most people miss. Influence is not always visible in what someone asks of you. It is often visible in what you stop asking of yourself. When you no longer question whether a dynamic is healthy because it looks impressive, intelligent, or socially acceptable, influence has already done its work. The silent calibrator depends on this blindness. They rely on the assumption that competence equals safety and that confidence equals authority. But authority that requires you to feel less yourself is not authority. It is displacement. Quiet power does not seek to correct these personalities. Correction implies engagement. Engagement implies access. Instead, quiet power restores internal alignment and lets misaligned dynamics collapse on their own, without resistance, without spectacle. This withdrawal is deeply unsettling to the calibrator, not because they lose you, but because they lose reflection. Influence needs feedback to function. When feedback disappears, so does control. What remains is neutrality. And neutrality is something this personality type cannot work with. You may feel guilt when stepping away. That guilt is not evidence of wrongdoing. It is residue from having adapted too long. Quiet power treats guilt as information, not instruction. It observes it without obeying it. In time, clarity returns. Your thoughts feel like your own again. Decisions regain their simplicity. You stop measuring yourself against someone else's frame and begin moving from internal alignment. That shift is subtle, but irreversible. Quiet power understands that the most dangerous control is the kind that convinces you it never existed. And that is why it leaves quietly, early, and without explanation. It chooses solitude over distortion, self-trust over admiration, and silence over subtle erosion, because nothing external is worth surrendering internal authority for. That is the line it never crosses. Ever. The third personality type quiet power avoids is the most deceptive, because it wears virtue like armor. This person does not dominate you emotionally or position themselves above you intellectually. Instead, they anchor themselves in morality. They speak in the language of values, ethics, sacrifice, and doing the right thing. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, they bind you with guilt. This is the moral leech. They don't take your energy through need. They don't take your confidence through influence. They take your freedom through obligation. At first, they appear principled, thoughtful, deeply concerned with fairness, justice, or goodness. Being around them feels meaningful, purposeful. You feel like a better person in their presence. And that's exactly how the hook sets. Dark psychology explains that morality is one of the strongest social control tools humans possess. Shame and guilt regulate behavior far more effectively than force ever could. The moral leech understands this intuitively, even if unconsciously. They frame situations in ways that position themselves as virtuous and others as potentially lacking. You begin noticing subtle cues. Disapproval disguised as concern. Silence where support should be. Comments like, "I would never do that," or "I just believe in loyalty," or "Some people don't value commitment the way I do." Nothing directed at you explicitly, but everything lands. Quiet power notices the internal shift immediately. Around this person, you start justifying yourself, explaining motives, proving intentions. You feel the need to show that you are good, fair, caring enough. That impulse is the doorway. Once you step through it, the dynamic changes. The moral leech does not ask for favors. They present expectations as duties. They don't say, "Do this for me." They say, "This is what good people do." And if you hesitate, you are not wrong. You are disappointing. You are not resisting. You are failing a value. Over time, your choices become constrained by an invisible moral framework that always seems to benefit them. Your time, your silence, your sacrifice. All justified by principles that somehow never apply equally in reverse. The most dangerous part is that they often believe their own narrative. They genuinely see themselves as righteous, which makes them immune to reflection. If you express discomfort, they don't argue. They appear hurt, confused, wounded by your lack of understanding. Suddenly, you're not just disagreeing. You're betraying something sacred. Quiet power never debates morality with someone who weaponizes it. Debate assumes shared ground. Here, morality is not a shared value. It is a lever. And once pulled, it lifts their needs while pressing yours down. You'll feel it in your body before you understand it cognitively. A tightening in your chest. A heaviness when their name appears. A sense that saying no will cost you something undefined, but severe. Reputation. Belonging. Approval. Being seen as good. This is how lives get quietly ruined. Not through chaos, but through self-abandonment disguised as virtue. You don't lose yourself in one decision. You lose yourself by consistently choosing obligation over alignment. Quiet power recognizes that true ethics never require coercion. Real values don't need enforcement. They don't shame. They don't threaten abandonment. They don't collapse when questioned. If morality demands your silence, your exhaustion, or your suppression, it is not morality. It is control wearing clean clothes. Running from the moral leech is difficult because leaving feels wrong. That feeling is the final test. Quiet power understands that guilt is not always a signal of wrongdoing. Often, it is the echo of a system you are stepping out of. So it disengages quietly. No arguments, no moral counterattacks, no explanations that invite further judgment. It stops participating in the frame entirely. Because as long as you remain inside their moral narrative, you are defenseless. Distance strips the leech of leverage. Without proximity, they cannot imply. Without access, they cannot shame. And without an audience, righteousness loses its power. What replaces the guilt is clarity, relief, a return to internal values that feel alive rather than enforced. Quiet power reconnects with ethics rooted in self-respect, not self-sacrifice. This personality type hates boundaries that are calm. They can argue against anger. They can shame defiance, but they cannot work with neutrality. Neutrality offers no moral surface to grip. That is why quiet power leaves silently. It does not accuse. It does not justify. It simply stops participating. And in that absence, the illusion breaks. You realize you were never immoral. You were just available. Quiet power chooses integrity over approval, alignment over obligation, self-trust over imposed virtue. It understands that the people who demand goodness, the loudest, are often the ones who benefit most from your silence. So when it senses morality being used as a leash rather than a compass, it does not hesitate. It runs not in fear, but in clarity, because a life governed by guilt is not a moral life. It is a managed one, and quiet power refuses to be managed. The final personality type quiet power runs from is the one most people never suspect, because it often looks like normality. It looks stable, responsible, mature. This person does not create chaos. They create gravity. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, they pull your life into orbit around their expectations. This is the emotional landlord. They do not invade your space loudly. They charge rent for existing near them. Your moods, decisions, priorities, and even your silence must be justified. Being around them feels heavy, but not traumatic enough to leave easily. That is why so many people stay too long. The emotional landlord believes relationships are transactions. Time given must be repaid. Support offered must be remembered. Presence becomes a debt ledger, and the unspoken rule is always the same. You owe more than you receive. At first, they appear dependable, grounded, the kind of person who has it together. They don't explode. They don't beg. They don't manipulate openly. Instead, they keep quiet score. And one day, when you hesitate, rest, or choose yourself, they remind you of everything they have done. Not aggressively, calmly. Dark psychology shows that obligation is more binding than affection. Love can fade. Desire can change. But obligation traps people inside roles they never agreed to. The emotional landlord excels at turning kindness into contracts. Quiet power begins to feel the tension early. Around this person, you feel watched, evaluated. Your choices feel like they require permission. If you are tired, they are disappointed. If you grow, they feel unsettled. If you pull away, they feel entitled to an explanation. Nothing is demanded explicitly. That is the genius of it. Everything is implied. You learn the rules through emotional consequences. Distance is punished with coldness. Independence is met with withdrawal. Compliance is rewarded with temporary warmth. Over time, you stop asking what you want. You ask what will keep things smooth. And that is how lives quietly shrink. Not through force, but through accommodation. The emotional landlord often frames themselves as the reasonable one. They speak of balance, effort, fairness. But fairness always seems to mean maintaining the status quo. Growth that disrupts their comfort is labeled selfish. Boundaries are framed as immaturity. Silence is interpreted as disrespect. Quiet power recognizes the pattern when autonomy begins to feel like betrayal. When choosing yourself creates tension rather than support. When peace is conditional. This is the moment most people doubt themselves. They wonder if they are ungrateful, too sensitive, too distant. The emotional landlord relies on this confusion. Because as long as you are questioning yourself, you are still paying rent. Quiet power stops paying without announcement. It does not accuse. It does not argue about fairness. It simply reclaims its internal authority. It stops over-explaining, stops justifying rest, stops negotiating for space. And when the emotional landlord feels the shift, they often reveal themselves. They ask what changed. They imply you are different now. They suggest something is wrong. And for the first time, quiet power does not rush to reassure them. Because the truth is simple. Nothing is wrong. A lease has expired. Running from this personality type does not require anger. It requires courage. The courage to disappoint someone who benefited from your compliance. The courage to choose discomfort now over depletion later. Quiet power understands that relationships should expand you, not manage you. Support should not come with surveillance. Presence should not come with invoices. When quiet power leaves, it leaves quietly. It does not slam doors. It does not seek validation. It simply stops orbiting. And without gravity, the emotional landlord loses control. This final realization changes everything. The people who ruin lives quietly are rarely evil. They are effective. They operate through systems of behavior that reward endurance and punish self-trust. Quiet power does not demonize them. It does something far more powerful. It becomes unavailable. Unavailable for guilt. Unavailable for obligation without consent. Unavailable for dynamics that require self-erasure. And in that unavailability, life returns. Energy returns. Clarity returns. Choice returns. Quiet power learns that running is not weakness. It is wisdom. It is knowing when staying will cost more than leaving. So when it recognizes these three personality types, it does not wait for proof. It does not wait for damage. It does not wait for collapse. It leaves early. It leaves cleanly. It leaves whole. Because the most dangerous traps are the ones that feel familiar. And the strongest power is the one that walks away before it has to explain why. That is quiet power. And it never apologizes for choosing itself. There is a moment, after distance is created, where silence speaks louder than explanation. In that silence, quiet power relearns itself. It notices how breathing feels lighter, how decisions no longer echo with imagined judgment, how time stretches open instead of collapsing inward. This is not rebellion. This is restoration. The final lesson is this. No one has the right to own emotional real estate inside you. Access is not entitlement. History is not ownership. Longevity is not permission. Quiet power honors what was without allowing it to dictate what must continue. Walking away does not erase the past. It reframes it. It turns experience into information instead of obligation. It replaces endurance with discernment. And from that place, future connections are chosen, not inherited. That is how quiet power survives systems designed to drain it. Not by fighting, not by proving, but by leaving before the cost becomes identity. It understands now that peace is not passive. It is protected. It is curated. It is defended through quiet exits and unapologetic self-selection. And from that understanding, a different life unfolds. One where power is internal, movement is intentional, and presence is a choice, not a debt owed to anyone watching from the sidelines. This is how freedom stays intact long after the leaving is done, without noise, explanation, or regret. Quiet power remembers, chooses, and moves forward without looking back ever in silence. If this resonated, don't share it to convince anyone. Share it only if it clarified something inside you. You don't need to confront the past. You don't need to explain your distance. You don't need permission to leave what drains you. If you want to keep refining this kind of awareness, where strength is calm and exits are silent, stay with this channel. Quiet power isn't loud. It's simply no longer available to be taken from.